Hail and well met and welcome back to the channel. Well, apparently yesterday, August 1st, was International Child Free Day, and I didn't even know that was a thing. So happy belated Child Free Day, everybody. And speaking of child freedom, yes, I'm going back to talking about that sort of thing. We're going to go a little bit different, and we're going to go a little more in depth because today I want to talk about antinatalism. So grab your philosophy hats, because I've got mine, and let's take a look and talk about existence and non-existence. That'll be fun, right? First off, we need to talk about what exactly is natalism and what is antinatalism. Natalism is the philosophical viewpoint that we should be giving birth and we should be procreating, and creating life is a good thing. And on the other hand, antinatalism is, of course, the exact opposite, where it's bad to give birth, it's bad to procreate, and it is bad to create life. And there are some interesting reasons for antinatalism. I'll talk about towards the end whether I am or am not an antinatalist, or what I think about natalism itself. Obviously, if you've been on this channel long enough, you know that I am a child-free person. I don't ever intend on having kids for a multitude of reasons. So, of course, I thought antinatalism was a very interesting viewpoint. First, let's take a look at just a couple reasons as to why there is natalism, or reasons behind pro-natalist viewpoint. And the reason that I found this topic to be interesting is that, you know, being an American, we are a very pro-natalist society. There's pressure all over the place from relatives, but not just from people, but from politicians, from religion, from television, from movies. How many times have you watched a TV show or a movie where at the very end everyone lives happily ever after by having a bunch of children? There's a couple instances, like in Parks and Recreation and The Big Bang Theory, where there's people who pretty much do not want kids, or say they specifically aren't interested, and then at the very end they have kids anyways. It's something you can't really escape, and it's something that we're told and taught about from the time that we're born, ironically, that having kids is just what you're going to do and it's going to make you happy. First, let's take a look at some of the pro-natalist viewpoints and some of the reasons why there is pro-natalist ideologies? I can't think of the correct phrasing. Let's look at some ideas behind that. One attribute of pro-natalism is that life is a gift and it's a good thing. This is where antinatalism immediately comes up, is because antinatalism says that's not the case. Life itself is not inherently a good thing. The reason being is that once you give birth to someone, you are condemning them to both the pleasures of life and the suffering of life, because you cannot have one without the other. It's inevitable. Pronatalism tends to think that the experiences itself is a gift. You know, we're here on Earth, we get to experience love and cats. Obviously, I'm not a very optimistic person, so it's a little trickier for me to look on the bright side of life. But there are good things there. It's just music, art, sunrises, stuff, boobs. There's good things in life. And so it's assumed that if you give birth to someone, you're giving them the gift of life, and they can, you know, have some of the pleasures in life. Antinatalism just says that those pleasures in life are usually outweighed by the negatives of life. And because you're condemning someone, I know condemning is a harsh word, but that's kind of the point. Because you're condemning someone to life, and you're condemning someone to inevitably face some suffering in some way, shape, or form, and varying extremes, it's not necessarily a good thing. It's kind of like, you know, you can look on the bright side, but you have to realistically acknowledge the bad things too. That just comes with the territory. So as far as life itself being a gift and a good thing, I tend to disagree with that. Because, you know, not to get super negative and depressing, but there are lives out there which are filled with pain and filled with suffering that is basically nothing but that, and then they're dead. I can't see that as being a good thing. Okay, so I think we've touched upon that topic. So another pro-natalist reason. It's important for the survival of humanity and its biological imperative to not go extinct. I really disagree with that one. I just researched, you know, what's the world population right about now, and as of April 2017 of this year, we're at 7.5 billion people. We're not going extinct anytime soon unless hell itself opens up or a meteor comes crashing down, or, the second bubonic plague comes around and we can't cure it fast enough. We're fine. We're not going extinct anytime soon. And, there's enough people so that even if a good chunk decide to not have kids and not procreate, we're going to be around for long enough anyways. I don't agree with that one. And I think that's another, it's a bingo when it comes to having kids. It's what we do. We are animals, and as animals, we have these biological imperatives to eat, to sleep, and to procreate, and, it's inevitable. We can't escape it. That's just a part of us. It's just that we live in a very different time now, where we have society and Netflix and the internet, and we can think and we can reason. We can have abstract ideas. And so this whole animalistic imperative thing is just kind of clashing with this, we're more advanced than that. We are animals, but we're more advanced animals. Like my cat right there. All she does is eat and shit and sleep. She doesn't have to worry about life goals and philosophy and meaning. That makes sense. We're humans. We're a little more advanced than that, so it kind of clashes. I don't agree with the biological imperative, especially when there's so fucking many of us. Some natalist ideologies consider human procreation a moral duty of a person since he is alive only because his family and society shared resources with him. I don't owe anyone anything, because one of the key points of antinatalism is I didn't consent to being here. I was born against my consent. I wasn't floating around in the nether realm of non-existence, hoping to get born one day, and I signed a document saying, yeah, give birth to me, Mom and Dad. That didn't happen. They just had me. Here I am. Can't do anything about it now. No, I completely disagree with that viewpoint. Because it goes back to, grandparents or someone's parents saying, give me grandkids. You don't owe them that. I mean, sure, they had you, but that doesn't mean you specifically owe them anything. You don't owe them a life debt. No. It's too similar to one of those bingos I've talked about in earlier videos. So I completely disagree with that viewpoint. You should give birth to a life that can succeed or be happy. Okay, this goes back to my first point about how you can't predict what someone's life is going to be like. You don't know if that kid is going to be born healthy or not. You don't. You don't know if that kid is going to die within a couple years. You don't know if they're going to get leukemia. You don't know. You're literally playing Russian roulette with a life that you are bringing into this world, again, with no consent from that life. It's a weird abstract idea, but it's something that I do kind of agree with. And that's a lot of pressure. Kind of, sort of. I mean, if you tell them, hey, we wanted to give birth to you because we want you to succeed and be happy, that's kind of putting pressure on them. What if they have crippling depression? What if their life just sucks? A really interesting comment I got in an earlier video when it comes to being child-free is, what if that kid is just a fucking ugly person? That blows if you're ugly. I mean, what are you supposed to do? I mean, you could get plastic surgery, but that's expensive as shit. And even then, I'm not a fan of plastic surgery because I can always tell if someone's had plastic surgery and it just looks weird. I'm one of those people, just live with what you got, but even then there's kind of a limit. Anyways, weird tangent. What if that life can't succeed? What if they're not happy? What then? What then? Okay, this is honestly just a stupid, a bingo that's been heard a million times before, and I've already talked about how stupid it is, but creating life is an accomplishment. No, it isn't, because a 14-year-old meth addict can give birth. It's so easy to give birth and have a kid. The very fact that I can't accidentally make a fucking pizza, but I can accidentally get someone pregnant is baffling to me. And no, it's not an accomplishment. There's 7.5 billion people, but if everyone can play guitar, it's not an accomplishment. If everyone can drive, it's not an accomplishment. If everyone can vote, that's not an accomplishment. Everyone is capable of having birth. Okay, not everyone, but you get the point. Most people are able to do this thing completely by accident. How many people have oops babies? That's not an accomplishment, that's an accident. It's not an accomplishment if you get drunk and forget to pull out. It's not an accomplishment if you, forgot birth control or something and accidentally got pregnant. I know I ramble on that one, but it's a frustrating bingo. Alright, I'm done with it. And another natalist viewpoint Continue the family line. I talked about this one before. What's so important about a family line? I mean, I don't know shit about my family line. I like my family and all, but I don't think there's royalty or anything. The only reason I would consider the family line to be important is if your family line literally involved having superpowers or something. I'm no expert, but I think in the Warhammer 40k universe, there's a specific bloodline that's, like, psychic and has powers and can save mankind. I can understand that if your bloodline involves having superpowers that can save the human race. Maybe then I can understand procreating then in order to save mankind. But even then, in the Warhammer 40k universe, humanity fucking blows, and honestly, every life in that universe should just be wiped out. It's horrible. There is nothing but pain and suffering in Warhammer 40k. As awesome as it is, oh, it's terrible. 7.5 billion people, how many of those bloodlines are really that important? Come on. Again, that's negative. Whatever. That's just my viewpoint. Okay, and this isn't an exact universal belief when it comes to pronatalism, but it is a comment from someone, and I thought it was interesting to just finally hear something like this. This person wrote, "I want a part of us, my husband and I, to live on after we've died. I enjoy having someone to show everything I love about the world, to teach and nurture and watch grow and explore. I find it hard to understand why anyone wouldn't want those things." I'm honestly just glad to have actually heard something like this, because it's kind of hard to nail down why procreation is so positive to a lot of people, and this really does explain it. But when you really tear it apart, the very first thing is I want. You know, it's a personal pleasure thing. It's a personal achievement thing. You're creating a human life because you want something to do with that human life, which again, that human life never consented to being born. I know it's an extremely negative viewpoint on the antinatalist end, but it is something to keep in mind. Again, what if that kid has depression and anxiety? What if that kid is gonna have a life of suffering? It's a personal pleasure thing, and I don't think that's enough to bring in human life. I'm happy that someone was able to really put into words that sort of viewpoint. Alright, so those were the best pro-natalist reasons I could find. Oh god, what the fuck? Sorry, I've got a bunch of dumbasses that live on this block that are yelling and screaming all the time. Yet another reason to not create life. They could be assholes like those people. Or Jake Paul. God, aren't you just tired of hearing about that little fucker? If there isn't a reason to not give birth, it's because it could be this.
There's nothing we could do, though. The Jake Paulers are the strongest army out there, Dab.
Can you imagine your child being that? I can't. That's a walking advertisement for the morning after pill right there. Anyways, so I wanted to look more into the antinatalist reasons. So, one big viewpoint on antinatalism is that the suffering of life is usually going to outweigh the good of life. It's a little extreme, especially because, you know, a lot of the suffering that they talk about isn't really going to be felt that much by the normal person. My go-to example of the most extreme form of suffering is, super depressing topic, so warning, but a kid being born, immediately sold into sex trafficking, and then being raped and abused until they die, not even until they're 7, and then dead. That's one of the most horrible, extreme examples I can imagine of a life filled with nothing but pain and suffering, and that's not worth it. And there are examples of that, of parents selling their kids into prostitution or pedophile rings for some fucking reason. It's unfathomable that something that horrible can happen, but it does happen. And that's awful, and I couldn't imagine bringing a child into a world where that's a legitimate outcome for some people. That's terrible. And of course, that's an extreme example, and that's not going to happen to a lot of people, but it's a thing, and it's horrible, and I can't stand a world where that is a real outcome for some people. Yeah, suffering is inevitable in some way, shape, or form, and by bringing in a human life, you are saying you're going to live a life where there is suffering, and there is some good. We're just going to hope that your good is going to outweigh that suffering, but the suffering is usually pretty bad. Friends and family dying, losing loved ones, people hurting you for no good reason. There's terrible things that can happen. And yes, it's pessimistic and nihilistic and pretty dark way to think about it, but really it can also be kind of realistic in a way. So that's one viewpoint, is that there is suffering, the suffering is inevitable. That doesn't quite excuse having a kid and then condemning them to a life where suffering is an inevitability. One of the biggest things that I kind of agree with, the next point, nobody consents to being born. I didn't consent to being born. I was just dropped off here. Imagine you wake up one morning and you're forced to play the shittiest game of your life and you can't quit playing. You would get pissed off and frustrated. And you didn't consent to playing the game, you're just playing the game. What's the worst board game or video game imaginable? Imagine you wake up one morning and you're chained to a chair and you're forced to play Superman 64 for a week straight. And you don't want to keep playing, but you have to play. And if you stop playing, you disappoint friends and family for some reason. So you have to keep playing the shitty game. I know this is a terrible example because I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I didn't consent to being born. No one consented to being born. We just kind of adapted to life and we're just kind of dealing with it. We're tolerating life. Normally because we have to, and we're kind of trained to, and we're taught that we just kind of have to deal with life as it comes. And I get it because, as animals, that's what we do. We adapt and we survive. But again, this kind of goes against the animal versus sophisticated creature that can think and have abstract thoughts thing, It's weird. It's this constant clash between our animal instincts and our more advanced intellectual instincts. So I kind of don't agree. I believe that consent is of utmost importance for almost everything. And yet this is the one exception where, welcome to Earth. Hopefully you don't get raped, It's a fucked up way to think about it, but it's true. Don't drink energy drinks. It's terrible for you. Since death is inevitable is therefore wrong because you are technically condemning someone to die. This is where it gets weird and abstract. It's pushing it a little bit, but I understand this point. Humans inevitably die. All life inevitably dies. So when you give birth to someone, you are condemning them to an inevitable death. Who knows when and how that death is going to happen, but it is inevitable. I know that I'm going to die. And when I was younger, I actually got panic attacks because I eventually realized that not only was I going to die, but my parents, who I love dearly, are going to die. And it sucks, and there's nothing I can do about it. I was legitimately getting anxiety attacks from the thoughts of my parents dying. It's such a scary thought. And yeah, that viewpoint is extremely pessimistic, but it's realistic. By giving birth to someone, yes, you're condemning them to life and death. Condemn is a harsh word there. But it is true. It's kind of true. We're all going to die at some point, and that's just a shitty part of life, a life that we never asked for, Oh man, this is dark. Also, in case you're wondering, yes, I am getting therapy. Thank you for asking. By giving birth, you are harming the planet and devouring limited resources. This is where it goes back to the selfishness of having kids, because having kids isn't... What does it really add to the planet? A helping hand? A contributing member to society? What about when you have too many contributing members to society? Eventually you can't contribute and you just take resources. I just think that there is a fine line between having I do believe that there's a fine line between having a healthy number of contributing members to society and then having too many people so that it's a drain. If you remember that old PC game Black and White from like 15 years ago, it was a God simulator game. I didn't understand strategy back then, so I created a bunch of people to have multiple citizens, so that way you could have more jobs in society. However, I didn't understand pacing that out. Eventually, I had too many people who weren't working or anything because all of the jobs were full, and I eventually just kept running out of food and resources because there were all these people, and even if I tried to fill up all the jobs, there wasn't enough of the resources. And I learned that from a game when I was like 10 years old, and now here I am watching the world actually do that, where there's too many people and not enough resources. And, yeah, I don't know what we're gonna do in like 20 years. 7.5 billion people, and we're just continually growing. That has to stop at some point. I'm not... it gets weird and dark, and it's It's kind of fucked up of me to say how humanity should be acting because, I'm just some asshole who has a camera and the internet. I don't think I should be enforcing anything. I just think it's something to think about and keep in mind. I thought about it, and I don't think we should be having as many people anymore. We should stop for a while. Non-existence is neither negative or positive, it is nothingness. Life has both positives and negatives, and non-existence is nothing. So, yeah, that's the very subjective part of life itself, is whether you view it as a negative or positive thing. However, not existing has none of those attributes because there's nothingness. You can't attribute a positive or negative experience to something that isn't there. It's like that bingo where it's like, oh, but what about the babies you could have? You can't give an attribute to something that doesn't exist. Non-existence isn't good or bad, it's just non-existence. It's not a part, you can't rate that. It's not a thing. But life can be judged. If you're born in America, maybe you have a pretty decent life, maybe you'll do okay, maybe you'll be neutral, maybe you'll be rich, maybe you'll be kind of poor, maybe you'll get by, maybe you'll be homeless, I don't know. But then you're born in like a third world country where militias are running around and murdering people, and you're in a child army or something, and there's nothing but disease, there's no good food, and, that can suck. Maybe you're born in a third world country where it's like the Middle East, and you're a woman, and now you're a second-class citizen your entire life, and then someone throws acid on your face. I don't know. And you know what? I'm gonna get yelled at for the whole Middle East thing, but fuck it. That happens, so I can comment. Yeah, if you don't exist, you don't have to deal with any of that. You can't play a bad game if you don't play a game at all. Can't have bad credit if you have no credit. It's a terrible example because you kind of need credit these days. No one gets hurt in non-existence. Okay, I'm basically repeating myself, so I'm going to skip that one. Same thing. No positives or negatives if you don't exist. Okay, the last one, again, this is an extremely subjective viewpoint. If you're a misanthrope, kind of like me, it's a no-brainer and erases the mistake of mankind. Okay, this is a really extreme one, and I'm usually joking about being a misanthrope, although I am and I'm not. I'm not a big fan of humanity. I mean, I listen to a lot of black metal, and a big topic in a lot of black metal is humanity sucks and we deserve to die. And I also worked in retail for like 10 years, so sorry humanity, but I fucking don't like you. Yeah, it's hard to be positive sometimes. There are good people out there, but more often than not, I'm just not a fan of the human race. I don't have a very positive outlook on humanity at times. I do not think that we are that great of a species. It's that clash of intellectualism and animal instincts. We're rational, but we're irrational. We're peaceful, but we're violent. We're capable of great kindness and terrible cruelty. We're just too chaotic, and I guess that's one of the costs of being a species that can think like we do. I don't know. It's tough. I'm not a people person. I'm kind of a misanthrope. As I mentioned before, I do think that we need to stop having kids and stop procreating, at least for a little while. There's too many people. There's too many problems on Earth. We can't seem to get along. There's as great as one country may be doing, there's a third world country that just is going through terrible shit right now. There's a clip from that show, True Detective. I don't watch it, but I honest to God feel like I should. I think I'm just going to end with that and let you make up your own mind. To sum up this extremely long video, antinatalism, I kind of see it, I kind of agree with it. I do think it can be a little extreme at times, but I do understand where it's coming from. I do think, especially with the issues of overpopulation and just some of the ills of humankind, it does have a point. I do think in a world with a lot of pain and suffering and a lot of things that you just can't control, it's just having kids and procreating doesn't make sense anymore. We have these animalistic urges to procreate and breed and do all of that, but it goes against where we are as a species. If we can think about this, we can put more thought into having kids. It's hard to say. I'm in the middle. I get it. I really don't agree with a lot of pro-natalist viewpoints, and it's mainly because I don't really see a point to having kids. So I'm kind of biased in that regard. And as far as antinatalism, I kind of agree. It might be a little extreme in some cases, but I lean towards antinatalism. Does that mean that you shouldn't ever have kids? No. If that's what you want out of life, all I ask, even if you're asking me for my stupid opinion, put some thought into it. Just make sure you're ready. Make sure you have the finances. Make sure that you're able to give that kid the best life you can. That's all I really worry about, because people don't seem to do that anymore. Anyways, I think that's it. What do you think about natalism and antinatalism? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Which side do you lean on? Am I talking too much? How does my face look now that I don't have a goatee anymore? I don't know. Yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, have a great day. Don't be a fool. Wrap your tool. Don't be a dick. Take care.
I think human consciousness was a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law.
Well, that sounds god-fucking awful, Rush.
We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, this accretion of sensory experience and feeling. Programmed with total assurance that we are each somebody, when in fact everybody's nobody.
I wouldn't go around spouting that shit I was you. People around here don't think that way. I don't think that way.
I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction. One last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal.
So, what's the point of getting out of bed in the morning?
I tell myself I bear witness. The real answer is that it's obviously my programming. And I lack the constitution for suicide.